What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the LOP show. I am Chad Pike, and this is Leadership on Purpose, the show designed to help you grow your influence and lead with confidence and humility. Today, Blake and I sat down with Dee Ann Turner. Dee Ann is a CEO. She's a former executive at Chick-Fil-A, and she's a Georgia Titan 100. That means she's one of the top 100 most influential executives in the city of Atlanta. And she comes to us today to talk all about how to turn your company into a talent magnet. Some of the things we talk about are how leaders can make a shift from hiring people to selecting talent. And it's really an approach of quality over quantity, making sure that you have your people in the right seat. Hiring people is about bodies. Selecting talent is about investing in the future of your organization, building leaders. And when you do that, your organization begins to attract more A players because A players want to be mentored by and be around the best of the best. Rock stars work with rock stars, and building great mentors and leaders is actually one of the biggest talent acquisition hacks that most companies miss. If you're a hiring manager, whether you're making your first hire or you've been hiring people for 20 years or more, and there's a ton of value in what Dee Ann has to say and what they implemented at Chick-fil-A, which we all know is an incredible organization from a culture perspective, and their success doesn't lie. And she was the mastermind behind a lot of those tactics. And now she's taken those to companies all over through her speaking, through her books, and through her consulting engagements. Check it out.
We have an amazing guest on the show today, Dee Ann Turner. Welcome to Leadership on Purpose.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a long time coming, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. This is going to be a fun one. So Dee Ann, just so the audience can get to know you a little bit better, give us your career flyover in 60 seconds.
When I graduated or when I got out of college the first time, I headed off to a company that had the most toxic culture you could imagine. I was there for 18 months and I discovered Chick-fil-A, which was the antithesis of that. The culture was so fantastic. I stayed there for 33 years. And during that time, I went from an administrative assistant to leading the talent function for Chick-fil-A. And then in my last 3 years there, I led sustainability. I wrote 3 best-selling books, which led to my next career that I've had now for 5 years. I've been on the road speaking about 50 times a year, consulting organizations and coaching talent. And then one of my most favorite roles is to be a executive in residence at High Point University. So in 60 seconds or less, I think that sums up what I've done.
I think you did it in 40, and we've got time for one more question. Okay. So one thing that I've been loving to ask people is if you could share a meal with anyone, past or present, who would it be and why?
It's not the first time I've been asked that question. I just haven't been asked it recently. But I think the person would be my maternal grandmother. She died before I was born. And so we're always curious about our roots, I think, sometimes. And that's just a real missing piece for us, for me. My mother is an incredible woman and has lived to the age of 86 so far. It's this thing like, I'd like to know where all that came from and that wisdom you get from a maternal grandmother. Blessed to have one on the other side until I was fully grown, but just didn't have that opportunity. So that's who it'd be if I had the chance.
I love that. That's an incredible answer. Thank you for
And
sharing.
I'm sure it would take place at a Chick-fil-A. There's no other choice.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that she would love a number one with lemonade.
Just like her granddaughter. No, that's amazing, Dee Ann. So, hey, we're so looking forward to jumping in with you on a lot of different themes today, but one of these I want to hit on from the get-go. You have this concept called win with who. And can you unpack that for us a little bit? What are you talking about when you're helping leaders think about how to win with their people?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a play. That's actually what I wanted the book Bet on Talent, my second book, to be titled, was Win with Who, and the publisher didn't like it. But it was a little bit of a play on Start with Why from Simon Sinek. If you start with why, then the way you win, how do you win? Well, you win with the who that you select. So it's all about the people. And my concepts around that, first of all, I think that's really important. If you're going to win with who, you have to change your language a little bit. So I encourage my clients and others that I've led to not hire people ever again. but instead to select talent. There's a huge difference between those two. Hiring people is about quantity. Do I have enough? Do I have enough? You think about the restaurant business. Do I have enough to cover this shift? Do I have enough in the kitchen? Do I have enough in the drive-thru? Do I have enough people in the dining room? But when you think about selecting talent, that's a game changer. That's competitive advantage. It's about quality. Do I have the right people in the right roles? Do I have the person who loves to smile at the customers and say my pleasure and can remember their names and their favorite orders and their story at the front counter? Do I have people who can work really fast in the back preparing food? Do I have those multitaskers that can be both friendly, run up an order and make a drink in the drive-thru all at the same time? That's how you select talent. Now, I know your next question, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it for you and answer it for you, Blake. Your next question is, well, how do you do that? What is your criteria for selecting talent? Well, I have 3 criteria. First, I focus on character. It always comes first. You can teach anybody to do almost anything, but if they don't have the character, the kind of character that takes care of your business, takes care of your customers, treats other team members with honor, dignity, and respect, if you don't have people with that kind of character, then I think you're losing already. Now, think about your organizational culture. Do you realize that your organizational culture is made up of the sum total of the character of the people in your organization? So if you want a strong, healthy, remarkable culture, you have to start by selecting people with character. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, character, the way I look for that is I'm looking for somebody whose own personal purpose, mission, and values match that of the organization. In fact, I'll back up a second. I wouldn't say match, but I would say align. So they don't have to match up perfectly, but align with the organization. That's how you're going to find a candidate that has the right character for your organization. Okay, so number 2 is competency. We all know what competency is. Competency is, can they do the work, or can they complete the role do they have the skill to be able to do that work? And that's a little bit easier. You know how to do that probably already, and so do your listeners. You're asking behavioral questions. Past performance is the best predictor of future performance. So you want to talk to that candidate and ask them to give you examples and stories about the way they've accomplished work in the past. So that's how you get at competency. And then lastly, chemistry is really, to me, it's the trickiest one because it's hard to get a feel, especially if you don't have a very long interview process, get a feel for chemistry of people. I used to think this was about somebody fitting in on a team, joining arms, singing Kumbaya, everybody gets along. But I've since learned I don't think that's actually what chemistry is, or the best chemistry for your team. I think the best chemistry in a candidate is when they come in and they have a different perspective, but they have the skills of collaboration, that they can bring that to the team. They can present effectively their different point of view and actually influence other members of the team. That's how a team accomplishes and gets the best solutions to their goals, is when you can bring diverse people with diverse perspectives together. They collaborate well, influence each other to the best outcome. That's great chemistry. So to sum it all up, win with who? You're going to select talent, not hire people. And that talent you select, you're going to focus on their character, competency, and chemistry.
I think every hiring manager, whether you've been selecting talent for a decade or more, or you're about to select your first person, needs to hear that. A couple of things that stood out to me there. The first, I love the chemistry piece. One of the things we've been talking about a lot lately is energy, and how when you're interviewing, what you say matters, but the energy that you bring into the room probably matters even more. To your point, can they collaborate? Do they provide a positive but different perspective? Do you think that they can come in and level up the team? The question I had, though, you talk about character and how, or the culture of the organization is the sum total of the character of your people, I think is what you said. How do you assess for character specifically through an interview process?
Okay, so let's back up a little bit. And when I talk about character, I'm talking about character that matches the organization. So I'm going to start with, what is the organization purpose, mission, and values? And I'm going to look for evidence that that person, first of all, they need to have a personal purpose, mission, and values. They may not have all three of them yet, depending on where they are in their career. But the more experienced, mature person is going to have given more thought likely to that. But then you find those less experienced people too who are on their game and they've already given thought to all of those as well. But that's what you're looking at first. What is their personal purpose, mission, and core values, and do those align with the organization? And I'm simply going to get at that by asking them, okay, so let me take one I'm really familiar with, Chick-fil-A, okay? So Chick-fil-A's number one core value is we're here to serve. So if I was interviewing a candidate in that arena, I would be looking at stories about how they've served in the past. And I'm not talking about, oh, I was a volunteer here, but I'm looking for really specific stories of how they've served others, both inside and outside of an organization. If they're less experienced people, they may not have had a lot of work experience, but you can really evaluate that in other areas of their life to learn about their heart for service. And so, when I was at Chick-fil-A, everybody served somebody, whether you were a team member serving the customer at the counter with a $10 bill, or you were the highest ranking executive in the organization, you were serving others. And so I would look for evidence for that. So when you're selecting for character, you're looking for evidence of those core values and their personal purpose and their mission. Not just that they can quote it to you, but they can give you examples of how they're actually living it out.
Your phrase there, win with who, and selecting talent, not just hiring people, like it sounds subtle, but it's a mindset shift. Because so much of the time when you're a hiring manager who needs people, like I need bodies. If you think of it that way, you're already behind the eight ball. Instead, if you shift that mindset to say, hey, I'm not about just bringing in people, I'm about selecting talent. That terminology even is just it's very helpful to kind of level up the rigor and the approach that you're taking in a selection process. So let me ask you this. I'm sure you've heard this a lot the last few years. The talent market has gotten extremely competitive. It's very hard to find talented people that you feel like are a good fit on the team. What kind of advice or insights do you have for still winning, I guess, when it seems like, hey, we used to have maybe 10 qualified applicants and we got to select one or two of them, right? And maybe that's changed a little bit in terms of the funnel. How should leaders be thinking about that in the talent market that we're in today?
Blake, during the course of my career, I've seen the talent market be in the same situation that it's in now 3 different times. I will tell you that I think this has been the most difficult and the longest that we've been through a cycle like that. But I've always seen it turn. Eventually, the cycle changes. Sometimes, and organizations are in a situation, they have to get through where they are. I was talking about this at a conference not long ago, and there was a guy who was hearing my message along these same topics that we're talking about. He came up afterwards and he said, and I think this is how I encourage all clients now. He said, I'm not there right now. He said, but I'm going to work on this so that I'm never in the situation I'm in now, that I'm trying to get warm bodies instead of selecting talent. Because when you work on this the hardest is when you don't need the talent. That's when you're solidifying the culture that's going to attract your next generation of talent. And you're putting that in place because that has so much to do with your ability to attract talent and to keep them. When times are better, you're going to cull through the talent that you have and make sure they're all what some would call A players, because A players will attract more A players. But some people are in a situation, they honestly have to survive this particular cycle. And so, yeah, you've got to have somebody, if you're running a business, the kind of business where somebody's depending on somebody to open the doors tomorrow, you're in a tough position unless you're going to go open the doors yourself, right? And so some people are in that position. And if you're one of those people that are in that position, hey, I just got to get through this. Okay, get through it, but resolve just like this guy did to say, I'm never going to be in this situation again, because when I get through it, I'm going to start applying some of these principles. And again, the principles are, it really starts with your culture. We haven't talked about that yet, about establishing a remarkable culture in your organization. And then that culture will attract the talent that you're looking for and it'll keep them there. And then you take that you combine that culture with that extraordinary talent. You teach that talent how to create amazing customer experiences, and that's how you create legendary customer service. Now, I just gave you a formula of something in just, less than a minute that at Chick-fil-A took them decades to create. So this is not easy. This is the hardest thing as a leader you might do. But once you find that secret sauce for your organization to do these things, it's like a flywheel that Jim Collins talks about in Good to Great. It just multiplies again and again and again. And you never let your foot off the pedal. You're always making that your top priority, but it gets easier because you're better at it. Your remarkable culture and your extraordinary talent is attracting more of the same.
I love the idea of helping leaders focus on creating a culture that attracts A players and then the flywheel that results from that. One of the things I can't help but think about that helps to build that culture that A players are attracted to is good mentorship, right? I think that one of the other things I've heard you say is our life is impacted by the people that we know and the books that we read. And part of the people that you know are the people that you work with and the people that mentor you and pour into you. Can you connect the dots for me on how mentorship can play into building a culture that attracts those A players that can set that flywheel off for a
Sure. Let me
company?
take a couple of steps back and talk about what talent today wants. And you guys are still, you're still relatively young in your careers too. I know you're experienced now, but unfortunately, Chad, I can remember you when. So, yeah, you're still young in your
Fair.
career. So you know what I'm about to say. And I think you're going to agree with me. And I'm really focused right now on millennials and Gen Z. There are three things they're looking for. Number one is a remarkable culture. We talked about that. The second thing is they're looking to be a part of something bigger than themselves, which is really part of a remarkable culture. In my definition, it is a compelling purpose or a meaningful purpose to be part of something that doesn't just make money for the leaders and the owners, but it actually impacts the world for something better. And the third thing, to get to your question, they're looking for is a leader who will invest in them personally and professionally. And they'll hang around if they find that person because they're really hard to find somebody who will do that. So mentoring is so important, both as you're leading your own team, but investing in others. Because if you're in an organization, you need to be recruiting the talent in your organization too for your next opening. So that's one reason you want to be known as a mentor and spend time with people because it is a way to identify and attract your future talent to your own team. But secondly, being an effective mentor, of course, grows the talent for the organization. And sometimes you're growing talent that's going to go to another organization. But again, that reputation of investing in personally and professionally other people will draw other talent because people may leave your organization, but they may say, one of the best experiences I had at XYZ company was that Joe was my mentor and Joe spent all this time with me doing all these things. And so that helps with your recruiting and also your retention of your employees. It's one of the reasons it's so important. And there's another big reason it's important is that you have to grow leaders for the future of your organization. At Chick-fil-A, it's an interesting study. And I've been gone for 5 years, so you won't find that I talk a lot about what they're doing now because I don't work there anymore. But as I watched this grow over time, and in one time period in particular was between 2001 when Chick-fil-A hit its first $1 billion in sales and 2018 when I left there where it was over $10 billion. And the growth that created, not just in revenues, but in infrastructure and the need for leaders. And one of the things that we were really focused on during those 19 years is we're going to need a lot of leaders. And if you don't grow them from within, then you have to go to the outside. And sometimes at those higher levels of your organization, sometimes it's great to bring in that fresh thinking, but it's good when you can bring in people who from within who are also familiar with your culture and can continue that. And it's another retention issue because if you're selecting a lot of talent from outside for your leadership roles, you're not going to keep your younger talent. They don't see a future for them there. So all of this mentoring plays a really important role of developing those future leaders, creating career tracks for your current talent so that they'll know they have an opportunity in the future as well, and growing those leaders to sustain your organization for the future.
I was laughing a little bit earlier, Deanne, when I was on mute because I realized I think that you're officially getting old when you love being thought of as young again. So it's just it's good for me. It's good for me. But hey, I love this emphasis on talent attraction. But what strikes me is that in today's very difficult talent market, everyone is struggling. But the companies and the cultures, the organizations that have a culture that can actually still attract talent as opposed to, hey, I just got to go out there and find some bodies. If you've invested in that culture on the front end, and I know you mentioned with Chick-fil-A, like it took years and years and years to kind of get this flywheel down. That's what pays dividends. And it might still be a challenge for those organizations as well, but those organizations are so much further ahead than the ones who haven't done that well. I love also how you define one of the biggest things that talented individuals care about is having a leader that they can learn from and enjoy working around. I think it's one of the biggest hiring hacks that an organization has available to them is to actually have great leaders. That's a hiring hack, right? Imagine that.
Oh,
Having great leaders is one of the biggest keys to attracting that kind of talent. And on the mentoring front, I'd love it if you could maybe unpack a little bit, Dan. How can you become a really great mentor? If you're looking to pour into that next generation leader, any practical tips on how to be a great mentor?
so I think organic mentorship is one of the best things that occurs. And what I mean by that is some organizations have mentoring programs, and that's good. It's a great place to start. And they match a team member with a mentor, and you have this formal relationship. And that's a good place to start. But sometimes the formal relationships aren't what bring you the best value, both for the mentor and the mentee. Sometimes it's those informal relationships where you just click with somebody and there's something about each other that you appreciate. And I mean, for one, you just end up spending more time together. That formal relationship becomes okay, we're supposed to meet for 2 hours a month. And, it becomes sort of routine and we talk about things. But the informal and the organic ones, I prefer more. So, how do you be a great mentor? Well, number one, you're available. And then, secondly, it's so important for the mentee, don't just talk about their work and give them advice, bring them into your work, let them see what you do. Give them access to things they wouldn't ordinarily have access to. I'm going to give you an example. The chief marketing officer was my mentor at Chick-fil-A for a couple of years. And he did that. That was one of the great things he did. And one of the things he did was to take me to the advertising agency for one of their high level meetings. And just to sit there and see how that comes about and how they develop things like the cow campaign, and to have that experience. Those were the kinds of things that were really memorable. That's where I learned the most, not in the one-on-ones lunches that we had, but when I actually experienced his world and what he was doing. So I think that's one of the best things you can do as a mentor, and then be a good listener. Don't come in ready to give all the advice, but really listen to what somebody is really working on and they're trying to improve on, and hear them out before you start giving your advice. And then I think the other thing is being willing to learn from the mentee. These are usually cross generational. And so this is a two-way relationship. It's not just the mentor to the mentee, but the mentee can actually teach the mentor a lot of things. Sometimes it's technology needs that they have. And I've seen that in lots of organizations where it's the mentee that's going, okay, if you do this, if you do that, you can make that work. Or it's the other thing where I've seen it is what I call reverse mentoring. And one of the areas is around diversity and inclusion. If you want to understand how women think, well, have a female mentee and let her teach you some things while you're teaching her some things. If I want to understand how somebody who's of a different race than me, they feel, then get a mentee of a different race and allow them to teach you in that relationship. So those are some of the things I've seen to be best practices in mentorship.
I love that. I feel like you've just called out a couple of mindset shifts today. One, the shift from hiring people to selecting talent. And the other one here on the mentorship piece is it's not about adding obligations to your calendar, but inviting people into your life and your work. And it's inviting people into relationship. Well, hey, we'll get you out of here on this one. But Deanne, can you tell our audience what is your why?
The way I put it is my path is to help other people find their path. When I went to work at Chick-fil-A, I came from a marketing background and I took a job in HR because the person who was then the VP of HR saw something in me, and he said, "You could go work in marketing, but I have this job opening that I think you'd be a really good fit for." And my intention was, a couple years into that job, I was going back to marketing because that's what I thought, that's where my skill set was. But a couple years in, I started really questioning, am I doing the right things? Am I even supposed to be at Chick-fil-A? I mean, I was just kind of like, I been called to something different? And then I realized that I had this greater purpose, and that was that my path was to help other people discover their path. And over the course of my career, I've done that with thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And that's pretty fulfilling to feel like, gosh, you know, that was the calling that I felt like I had when I was 21 years old. And let's just say a lot of decades later, I'm still living it out.
That is amazing. I love that, Deanne. And I guess I'll tack on to that one real quick. We like to ask some of our guests about a BHAG. You've accomplished so much in your career already, in your life already. But is there any kind of big, hairy, audacious goal that you're chasing after these days?
Yeah. So since I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a writer. And when I wrote my first book, It's My Pleasure, and published it in 2015, when I was going to write that book, I told my publisher I wanted to write fiction. He said, "Well, you can't do that yet. Your platform is business. You have to write a business book specifically about culture and talent because that's your expertise." So I went on to write 3 books about that. And I don't think I have any more words. We'll see if anything else comes to me, but I really want to write fiction. And so I'd like to write a novel, and that's my BHAG at some point in the next decade.
How cool is that? So, hey, where's the best place for our audience to find you, look you up, follow you?
At deeannturner.com. That's DEEANN Turner.com. You can find my podcast there. You can find my books there, and whatever I'm up to, blog posts, all that kind of stuff. You could also find me and love to connect with me on LinkedIn, on my Facebook author page, which is Dee Ann Turner Author, and on Instagram at Dee Ann Turner.
Fantastic. This has been an absolute blast. It's been our pleasure, Deanne, to have you on this show. And we can't wait to see what you continue to do going forward. If you enjoyed this episode, the best thing you can do is be a river, not a reservoir. Who could you share this with that could also get value from it as well? Until next time, keep leading on purpose. Peace.